Do life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm the Reverend Brooke Atchley.
And I'm Justin Bowling.
Y'all, I almost forgot my own name.
I thought you had a little bit of a pause there. I didn't know if it was internet issues or...
That's impressive. It's a long day, long week, long year.
Oh my gosh. And I'm not even the one packing, so
Yeah. I think we're all overly exhausted at this point for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But so tonight we are, I guess, with heavy hearts, we are talking about the America's gun culture, and specifically with the mass shootings that's been going on. I didn't realize when we talked about doing this that we would have such a horrible mass shooting just yesterday.
Yeah, we talked about this 3 or 4 weeks ago, that this was going to be our topic for the week, and we were actually supposed to record Sunday.
Yeah.
And we needed to postpone, and
I mean, honestly, in today's environment, if you postpone a day, you're going to have another mass shooting to talk about. Essentially, I think that's where we're at as a country. So, it's. I'm just very tired of seeing those headlines. I'm very tired. I mean, obviously, my prayers are with those families and those communities. I just can't understand. I can't fathom the devastation that a parent would have to go through to lose their child in something like that. That is just horrible. So, obviously our prayers are with you, but I don't know what else we can do. That's the thing, and that's where I'm at mentally on all of this. So we're gonna talk about it, but I'm not in a great mental state.
Aaron and I have talked a lot about this over the last 48 hours or so, and we were actually in preparation to talk about on Sunday. We had talked about some things, and then this happened, and we were in the midst of doing an event at church, and which ironically is called Celebrating Families, which is about strengthening families that are going through crisis. And the headlines started popping up, and so we were talking about and I think the question that lots of us are wrestling with is, why is this happening? What makes our culture unique that this is happening? And what can any of us do about it? And I think the hard thing is we feel helpless.
Yeah. And that's what they do is that's one of the biggest psychological effects of stuff like that is it's a lot like, the effects of a large scale terrorist attack type thing. I mean, a lot of them are terrorist attacks. Mm-hmm. So it puts fear of your safety wherever you're at. Like you just have a hard time feeling comfortable anywhere.
Yeah. And I mean, I wonder, because it seems like most of these mass shootings, when they target schools, is of other students that are of the age, I guess, within the age. He obviously didn't go to that school because he was 18, but he was in, I don't even know if he was in school. He was working, I think. So was he a high school dropout or?
Yes.
Okay.
My understanding is that he had just kind of quit attending school, that maybe he should have been graduating this year.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, and here's, the question that came up in a conversation last night was, how are people so numb to other people's suffering that they don't stop at the first shot, the first falling of someone, the first, what is as a culture, what is going on, what are people being exposed to, what's not happening in people's lives, that part of them is turned off, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think a big component of this is mental health, and being able to detect mental health issues, depression, anxiety, those type of things. I do have to wonder. I mean, I hate to, I guess, question people's parenting skills. I'm not a parent, and I likely will never be one. So I can't say anything about that. But I do wonder, like, how do you end up with someone who's 18 and you're not able to detect these things? I mean, is it just they're that hidden, that they're that well at hiding things, or is it you're not paying attention? Is it that?
Well, I'll push back a little bit. Even if you can see these things, I'm not sure there's a lot as a parent you can do. I mean, the lack of mental health resources, and not even the lack of resources, but the lack of conversation about those, how to access what's there. Um, you know, it can be difficult to get anybody to listen to you when you talk about mental health struggles. I mean, we've had some mental health struggles in our own family, particularly around anxiety, and it took years of us just really pushing before anybody would help one of our kids. And it's because they don't want to put kids on. I mean, it's a really difficult road to go. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, like, even if you did identify, which obviously is the first step, like to know that somebody's exhibiting behaviors that seem at risk as a parent or as a teacher or somebody else, who would be interacting with a child that's showing something like that. But like you're saying, Brooke, like it's not clear what the next step is. Like, okay, something vague like get help, but we don't have a lot of structures in place that make it clear on what exactly that should look like. Like,
Right.
people
What
might
help?
have a different idea. Yeah, or how to approach it. Yeah,
No.
there's
Right.
like a
And
lot of holes that somebody has to fall through for something like that to happen, and those holes are, they exist at every level.
right. And that's where, I mean, the government is failing epically when it comes to, you know, mental health, how the resources to handle it, what to do, and then anything that is, background checks and anything else to where if someone does have a mental issue, that we can stop them from buying legally guns. And from my understanding, this 18-year-old, he legally bought it. Like this was completely, this was not something where he stole the gun or anything like that. He actually legally bought this thing. So whatever checks and balances that was in place for him to buy it didn't detect it. Now, I'm not saying he may not have had any kind of background. That could be like he could have just passed it with flying colors, or the background checks didn't happen. Right, one or the other. I would say it's the latter, but I don't know that to be a fact. So
Yeah, and I think the pushback you're going to get on that is just because somebody has a mental health diagnosis, that shouldn't preclude them from certain things that we do as a society. If we're trying to take away the stigma of mental health, then we have to take away the stigma. And if you're going to be diagnosed with a mental health issue, then you're not going to be allowed to, be a law enforcement officer, or, I mean, you name it. It will cause people to quit seeking help. And that's, I think, the people's fear about having a database. I mean, you want to talk about HIPAA rights. You're just going to let some gun shop owner run a background check and pop up what your medical history is. I
And
mean,
I
how
think
does
that's,
that work?
yeah, that's kind of when you're talking about red flag laws, which is essentially kind of what something like that is. That's one of those things that people agree with, like 85, 90% in theory, if you just ask, like, do you support this? But then when you start getting into the, the devil's in the details things on stuff like that, some people break off because, like you're saying, stuff like that. Some people break off because, like, if it's lots of times people talk about modeling something after like the no-fly list or something like that. And then you're talking about something that's secret and doesn't have any way to appeal. And so like, I feel like that's kind of a big problem with their conversations around stuff like this. We can agree on a lot of higher level things, but then when we start actually implementing, we hit issues and then just, I guess, stop. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's like I was diagnosed with postpartum depression and general anxiety after the birth of one of my kids. I've not had struggles with that in years now, but would that preclude me from a list? Because I sought help. My guess is, in this gentleman's case, he didn't seek help.
Yeah. That would be.
And as someone who deals with people in mental illness in my job, not because I'm a counselor, but because, or a therapist or a physician, but because clergy sometimes are the first stop when people are struggling with mental health issues, even our hands are tied. You can't, people, I mean, if you go to the emergency room, they can hold you for 72 hours. I mean, it's just, it's not easy for folks to get help.
So then, what can we do? Is it just hopeless? Like, is it actually a situation where we have to kind of admit that it's hopeless? We just have to deal with the outcome.
I don't know if it's hopeless. I mean, I think, after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, the mantra was, if you see something, say something, right? And they did very specific things. They said, if you see this, report it. If you see that, report it. They gave us a checklist of what to be looking for. It made us feel like we had some more sense of control in that. I agree with our news media outlets not glorifying the shooters. But I think what happens is the general public doesn't know what the red flags are, the warning flags are. Like, I mean, if you think about it, we end up knowing nothing about the folks who are committing these acts of violence other than their names and whatever that their parents may or other family members may say. But the investigations are locked up and they're not talked about for years later. And I wonder if we just don't know what to look for.
I've always heard kind of the opposite. Like there's a pretty, well, not that we, they glorify them. Sorry, I probably should have been more specific, but more like that. There's a pretty well set criteria on like what mass shooters kind of fall into type thing, and it's very unique about among a lot of other crimes. Like they're usually well affluent and not necessarily from lower income backgrounds, and all these other criteria that kind of fit what specifically makes not what makes a mass shooter, but like kind of the subgroup that they come out of. And to me, that's kind of one of the things that makes this hard to talk about in terms of like when you're talking about what kind of things we can do, legally, like with laws and stuff like that, because lots of times it gets conflated with other gun violence stuff, while usually the issues that revolve around a mass shooting are pretty unique when you compare it to the other gun violence, which is also an epidemic, in our country, that has a lot of different sets of criteria. And so like it makes it hard to talk about that conversation when those get conflated together, I guess, is something I thought that was worth mentioning.
Yeah, I agree. I do wish if there are red flags throughout somebody's history, right? Like we've now had lots of these mass shootings specifically around schools, whether they be secondary schools, elementary schools, or universities, right? And I don't know that as parents, people are educated on what to look for, or guardians or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, and you don't want to profile because you don't want to like peg a kid and be like, ooh,
Right.
That's the next. But here's something today. We took Hudson out to a park And it wasn't super crowded. It was kind of in the middle of the day, schools are getting out. And we were in, of course, the tiny little section, the under 2 or 2 to 4 section. And there was a young teen boy, right? Sullen looking, obviously not happy to be there. But he had this bag of poppets. You know what I'm talking about? Like the things you throw down and they explode. And he was throwing it close enough to people to make you be like, what was that? But not at people. And my immediate thought was, this kid needs help. And he did it. We were there for an hour and a half. He did it the entire hour and a half. And not one adult said a word to him. And my thought was, this is great. Like, this is dangerous kind of behavior. Why is somebody not stopping him? If we're not willing to say something in a park about something that minor, I don't know.
It's very disheartening. Like I just don't have good answers. Like, and the thing is when these things happen, everybody wants an emotional response. Basically politically, like legally, just throw legislation out to help the people who have went through this kind of see that, and so I think that's what ends up happening. But like, I just don't understand why we are in a in a country that absolutely adores guns, just loves it. I mean, I understand the Second Amendment and the Constitution. I understand it's there. The founders, they meant for us to be able to defend ourselves. But I just can't grasp why that has become an idol, is what I would call it.
So do you think it's the gun that has become an idol, or do you think it is the fight? It's you're not going to tell me that I can't have this.
It's both. I mean, yeah. So your anti-government people are the same people that are, the pro-gun, you can't do any kind of limitations on my guns because of the Second Amendment. It says right there. But it's the same, and it's funny because, they're using a government written document to defend their stance. And sure, I will admit, it's so open-ended. I think that it is probably on their side. I will admit that. I just dislike it a lot that it's that open-ended. I'm in favor of restrictions, just limitations. Now, I understand, like I've heard from, gun enthusiasts and stuff, that the AK-47, which is what a lot of these mass shootings are with.
AR-15.
Or AR-15. AK-47, that is illegal, right?
Yes.
That is okay.
Yeah. That's the automatic weapon.
AR-15, isn't it like the brother or the sister to the AK-47? It's kind of the look of it type thing.
More like I think it's more like an M16 or something. But.
Okay, whatever. That's how much I know about guns. Anyway, but the AR-15 is the one that's typically used in these things, and I've heard the pushback is that, well, the AR-15 is no more powerful than any other semi-automatic handgun or rifle or whatever. That it looks dangerous, more dangerous than what it is. And that may be true. Like, again, I'm not a gun enthusiast or an expert, and I don't plan to ever be. But if this has become a symbol of mass shootings, and this is what mass shooters are glorifying, this is the one gun that they really, really like, to me, that's grounds to take it off the market.
So I think my issue with that, though, is I just don't see... Like, I think that's why they use it, yes, but I don't see how that would do anything either, because like some of the worst mass shootings, a lot of the worst mass shootings haven't used it. The one I was present for at Virginia Tech was 2 pistols. Mm-hmm. The one in Las Vegas was another rifle. And I feel like that's the gun that people are going to choose because of that reasons. But if that
Mhm.
reason's taken, like if that choice is taken away, they're just going to choose something else. It's kind of like, you know, a lot of mass shooters you think of in trench coats. You know, do
Right.
they do that because of the look? But, I mean, yeah, sure, it makes them probably engorge their power or whatever, you know. But if you ban a trench coat, I just don't see that going anywhere in terms of stopping a mass shooting.
So you would see it as the slippery slope where this is the gun that we take away now, but then next we're going to have handguns, and then we're going to take away them
Well,
next because
I mean,
same
maybe,
reason.
but it's also not doing anything but making us feel better about ourselves that without actually doing anything.
Well, so according to statista.com, which is a place where you can search for all kinds of statistics, actually the most popular weapon used in in mass shootings between 1982 and May of 2022 were handguns by far.
That's interesting.
And 146 handguns have been used in mass shootings, 58 rifles, and 30 shotguns.
So is the problem? I mean, because it seems like media wise that the AR-15 is the one that's getting the coverage. Is it?
It
Is
does.
it? Is it because we get more media coverage on those type of
Here's what I think.
shootings?
I think they talk about the other ones. I think we just remember the pictures of the
Maybe.
AR-15s because it looks like
It
what
looks-
we imagine a soldier carrying,
Yeah.
or, you know, and so we're like, oh, you know, that's a scary looking weapon.
And it is. I think that it looks that way for intimidation. I really do. And I just dislike the idea that we, you know, are openly encouraging people to carry those type of weapons in public and intimidating, because it's what it's doing. I dislike that a lot. You know, so I don't know. I guess maybe let's focus a little more on the gun culture itself.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Oh, sorry. I wanted to, before you asked the question, say that I thought it was both was an idol too, because of everything that Brooke mentioned about the fighting back. But I don't see how guns themselves couldn't be an idol when you look at, like, there's so many examples of like Christmas cards and stuff that people take with guns, and let's take my family pictures around ourselves with guns on the deck. Like that's gross. Like I don't see how that's not anything but idolizing it.
It's disgusting. Now, I do think, to Brooke's point, the reason why people do that is to trigger the other side that they despise. I think that's why they do it. That's the motivation. But I do believe that they are idolizing guns and the Second Amendment. You know, hand in hand, they're idolizing it. You know, above health, safety. You know, especially if you're a Christian, you're a believer. I just don't see how you end up in this mind frame where you are just in love with it.
I think it's a bigger issue than just the Second Amendment or our rights to possess arms, right? I think it's a rights issue. And I think what people who claim to follow Christ forget is that we're called often as followers of Christ to set aside what is it we would consider a right.
Mhm.
Like, you know, it's not a could we do it, or it's should we do it. And I don't understand the marriage of Christianity and this right thing. People will tell me that it's because they're terrified that they're going to be told that, you know, if some rights start getting taken away, then it won't be long till their rights to worship or whatever are taken away. But I can't help but think that that's hogwash. Like, you can't tell me that you're fighting so hard for your Second Amendment rights because you're afraid that you're not going to be able to gather to worship.
And you know what?
Yeah.
It was taken away once. It was taken. Didn't exist at the early start of the church, and Christianity thrived. God protected the church and brought her through that time period. And I'm not saying that like we should just welcome that or something if that's really where you think it's going or something. Which I feel like is extreme, but
I mean, I'm just
but
like,
at the same time, like, it's not our duty to be God's agent in protecting stuff like that, like dealing out vengeance on earth. That's not what he calls us to do.
Yeah. And And I think that's important to remember as a Christian. We are called to further God's kingdom. Sometimes that kingdom's, and most of the time, that kingdom is not going to look like America. It's going to be in conflict.
Mhm.
And we're going to have to choose God's kingdom and the choices that we are called to make in the example of Jesus. Shane Claiborne, I read an article called God and Guns, and he was, I guess, the writer of it. And he made a quote here, and he says, "The cross and the gun gives us two different versions of power. One of them says, I'm willing to kill. The other one says, I'm willing to die." And I think that's the way you got to look at it. We are actually, as Christians, we are called to be on the dying side, and I that's why I can't wrap my hand around this. And maybe I subscribe. Maybe it's the flavor of Christianity you're subscribing to. That's because I consider myself a pacifist. I really do. I don't own a gun. I don't think I own a weapon other than a knife or something. It's a kitchen knife. And so if someone broke into my house and they were armed, I'm probably going to die. But whatever. Like I'm just accepted that. Like I'm not going to own a gun. It's one of those things that I feel very committed to. Like and would feel guilty owning one type thing. So that's where I live.
And I think you're right too. I think one thing though that we shouldn't minimize though is that as Christians we are called to speak out and protect the helpless and the weak
Mhm.
and those in need of help. So like, even though we also should be willing to lay down our lives for the cross. That's what Christ tells us. Take up your cross and follow me. We shouldn't, be like, well, now everybody else has to do that too. So I don't think that's what you're saying, but I know that I've heard that as a response too, like that we need to be able to protect others.
Right. And I understand that. I mean, I understand the idea of self-defense. I also understand as a government, you can't always use, I guess, biblical Jesus teachings in terms of defending the country. You are called to actually protect, all the people of a country. So I don't think you can necessarily say, well, we're all called to just sacrifice each other. We can never go into war. Now, if I was president, that would probably be how I would run things, and I would be a very bad president. I'm going to say that I would be much worse than Jimmy Carter ever thought about being. I love him to death. He would be who I emulate, and everybody would hate me.
So don't you think though that part of what we are struggling with is just the lack of common sense? I mean, across the board. I mean, I feel like as a culture and as a society that we have dug our heels so far into whatever opinions we espouse that we cannot see common sense solutions.
Yep. And people usually agree with the common sense solutions in theory. It's just
In
when you
theory.
start playing it out in the political game, like you were talking about earlier, Justin, like people taking those pictures just to make the other side mad. Like to me, that almost makes it even worse. Like you're claiming to be a Christian and you're sitting there just trying to make somebody mad about something that's such a, like, even if you disagree with their point, you have to realize you're talking about a very serious issue that people are talking about, people dying and the loss of, children's lives. Like, don't make light of it, even if you disagree with someone's solution. That there's no need to poke at others.
Yeah. I mean, I think we are so engulfed in tribalism in this country, and whatever camps you live in, that's the one you have to defend. That it's going to make it hard for really any issue now to be fixed via the government and legislation. I'm to the point where I think I'm close to just giving up on politics and not voting again. Like that's how disappointing I am with it.
Yeah, I do wonder. I don't know if any of the solutions that we have talked about or even mentioned would solve our issue of what is causing mass shootings. I mean, yes, guns make it easier, right? But we saw a few years ago and we've seen this across the country now, where people drive cars into groups of people, right? Because in parades and whatever, trying to cause mass carnage. I mean, so it's not just a gun issue that's causing these
So
things.
here's a question about guns specifically, and maybe
Mhm.
the gun culture at large. Does owning a gun, having a gun in your possession, make you more brave than you are mentally? Like, if you own a gun, you know that you can stand a certain distance away, and you can get a certain amount of shots away, that you're not really in danger. Plus, this guy was wearing a bulletproof vest too. So
Without
I'm
without the plates.
without the plates. Well, whatever.
With a tactical vest without plates.
I just wonder if there's something specific about guns that would make you more apt to do these things versus doing it via like a vehicle, knowing you're going to take your own life too. Right? Well, maybe, or you're more likely to get caught and or take your own life doing it either hand to hand combat or via a vehicle versus a gun.
I think where that rationale falls apart though is in mass shootings. They're not doing them far away. When you think about the school shootings, they're not across the field.
That's true.
They're in the
snipers.
Same, I mean, they're close proximity to the folks that they are trying to harm. So that's
I think it's, oh, go ahead.
I just think that's where that kind of logic starts to break down.
I think there's something to it though, because I think that otherwise, like the argument like for pro guns, for arguing why we should have them is that it makes it easier to do stuff like this. It makes it easier to defend yourself because they are more efficient than basically any other method. So yeah, I mean that's kind of the other side of that sword, is that it is going to make it easier to perform mass acts of carnage. I mean, it obviously has to, just by definition, by that. And the same type of thing about making yourself feel more confident. A lot of people argue about like the helpless being able to defend themselves is one of the great things about, the right to own a gun. And that also is going to translate into what you were talking about, Justin. I feel like somebody who decides to do something totally awful and evil is going to feel more confident while they're doing it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the double-edged sword.
I think it has to be. And like, I mean, like we have to talk about, if you think that there is a positive to guns, that has to also be the negative to guns, is that it makes it easier to do those things. And I mean, if you look at, I mean, the thing with mass shootings too, like obviously they're insanely horrific and they hit us right in our psychological area in places that just like, it just hurts. And it takes, like you said, Justin, days to kind of process even. But when you look at overall like homicide violence, it's somewhere around 2% of the violence. But when you look at homicide violence of the US compared to other countries, we're in a rough spot. We're not where you would kind of think a first world country would kind of be. But just kind of reading down the let's see, what is this, by 100,000, I think. Yeah, intentional homicides by 100,000. We're at 5.3. Other people around that same number are Ukraine, Ecuador, Zambia, Sudan, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Cuba, Angola. Now those are all like at 5.3. And you look at what you would kind of think that the US would normally compare to on statistics like this is like, maybe Canada, Western European countries. Ireland's at 0.9, Germany's at 1.0, Great Britain's at 1.2, and I think Canada's a little bit higher. At 1.8. But I mean, you're talking 3 to 4 times higher for any of the countries you would think you would compare the US to, and you wouldn't. And I'm not trying to speak bad about other countries or something, but you would not expect a country that's with the highest GDP in the world and largest military to be compared to some of the ones that I was listing there. So I think there has to be something. There has to be some kind of explanation for that, and I think there has to be something we should want to do to bring that down. But that's where I think the conversation gets difficult and muddied, because we talk about this after mass shootings. We want to focus on things like AR-15s. We want to focus on things to stop that. But that's a drop in the bucket to the overall problem that we see in the U.S. that also should be addressed.
So here's a question for you then. It when you say homicide, was that specific to guns, or is that counting all homicides?
This is all weapons.
All weapons. But I mean, for the U.S., that would the majority. That big majority is going to be
80% of the U.S. homicides are from guns.
Okay. So, do you think that the conversation should, instead of targeting specific guns, do we have to be more open ended with it? Like, is this actually a gun problem?
I think you have to say that guns contribute a lot to this. Yes,
I agree.
I think
go ahead.
I think you have to be. I mean, I think we want to make this an easy solution.
I don't think it's an easy solution, though.
Right. And we want to say, let's regulate guns. And that might be a short-term, short-fix solution. You know, Aaron and I were talking about this the other day, and I was like, you know, when methamphetamine first came on the scene and became a problem, what did we do? We limited Sudafed. All of us have to go in. We have to show our IDs. We have to be put into a system to get Sudafed, right?
And then we had no more meth, right?
Yeah, right. You know, so, you know, what you saw is a quick decline, right? Like there was a quick decline in the production of methamphetamines, and then it exploded, the use of methamphetamines and the substance abuse. So my concern is if we do the quick fix and only the quick fix, then we're just going to replace it with something else. And I think the numbers that Bowling was talking about, our homicide rate overall, you know, is an issue. What is it about our culture that is allowing us to not recognize the gift of humanity in other people? What are we doing to polarize ourselves so much that we no longer see people, but just as objects in our way?
And I think that's exactly why I was going to say I don't think this is a remotely easy solution. Like people will say, like, point to that and be like, well, we should do what, you know, Australia did, the mythical Australia, who takes, you know, went and confiscated everybody's guns. That is a solution that is completely, in my mind, it just can't happen in the U.S. The culture is too different.
It would be a war.
It would not. It just would not work. And what you did confiscate would be from the law-abiding citizens in that case, like what everybody kind of throws out there. Like there's just no way that would happen in the U.S. There's not an easy solution to that problem at all.
That's true.
So an interesting side note, you know, I used to travel as a United Methodist missionary, and when I would travel talking about mission work or whatever, I would be hosted by different people at the different churches that are at. Not 100%, but way up. It happened more often than not. The host family was also responsible for entertaining me, right? Like taking me to dinner or showing me something about the area or doing something that they thought I would like to do. Do you know what happened more often than not? They took me to a gun range or somewhere to fire guns because of where I came from.
Wow.
I mean, there's honestly a lot of bonding over guns, and
it was a lot of
this
fun.
country. I have went to so many gun ranges with my family, and that's some of my I have so many fond memories of that. Like I don't think I'm definitely not criticizing all of gun culture, but there is
some exhilaration that comes from feeling the power of that gun in your hand and it going off and you hitting the target exactly where you want to. I mean, it's pretty cool. So
yeah.
I
mean, but the targets that look like humans kind of disturb me. I find that, and I think that's part of the gun culture conversation. Like I think over the past couple hundred years, we have glorified guns in media, like your westerns, for example, back in the day, right? So all your heroes was carrying a gun. They could resolve any conflict with a gun. Well, and that's just transition to Hollywood movies. It then transition to video games. And I'm obviously not one that's going to say that video games is causing this. I just think media is influencing gun culture to where it looks like you can be a hero as long as you have a gun.
See, I would almost say that the the causation works the other way. Our culture of independent spirit and, wanting to solve matters ourselves, whatever way we have to, whether it be outside the law, like that's part of the American spirit. And that kind of pushes,
media.
the media into that because it fits what we buy. That's what we want to see.
And
Maybe.
I wonder if it's not so much the weapons, because I mean, the Western heyday, when Westerns were at their heyday, right? You didn't have all of this violence going on. I wonder if it is the realism of the carnage that we're seeing in our media now, not the weapons, but it has desensitized us to bodies being blown up and, that kind of stuff, that we don't think about it. If you think about those Westerns, and Lord knows, because my daddy, who he is, I have seen my fair share of Westerns. When people were shot, you didn't see the aftermath like you would now in a film or even a TV show.
Which I think goes back to, most people, I mean, we're not all mass shooters. We're all consuming the same media. We're not all mass shooters. So there's something about certain people that, whatever it is, that can't compartmentalize between reality and the value of people and the sacredness of people and actually not doing these things because it's wrong and wanting to do those things for whatever reason. I feel like with the explosion of technology and media in your hand, it's just going to increase that. And so we need to figure out, like, what is it about these certain types of people that they can't compartmentalize? Because we all have to, if we're going to consume that type of media.
And I do think it's worth pointing out too that any of the criticisms I think we made of gun culture, I don't think it's rare to find some of the mass shooters being somebody who is also one of that kind of subculture that owns 40 guns. Most of them usually have bought the weapon semi recently, only own the one weapon type thing. It's not people usually who are doing that. But one other statistic in terms of that, you're talking about like what kind of causes this, as I feel like the strife we see just as a nation as a whole within interpersonal relationships reflects on the numbers you see in these homicides and mass shootings. Because you look at like the past 20 years, the worst year for any of these by far is like 2020, with some of our most political strife that we've had in decades. So like that just translate over into those. Like I don't think that means like, oh, just we all get along and that'll solve it. But I think the problem gets worse when we start having those extreme divides in every walk of life. And that's really what it is. It's like this extremist mindset we have against people, to where people get pushed in those corners. I mean, not pushed in those corners, or put themselves in these corners to where they feel like that there's no way to fight this, so I'm just going to go out there and do what little I can. And it's like you're getting extremized by either some kind of website or some kind of like group of people that you've found and read. Like that seems like kind of the biggest common denominator I feel like you see in terms of stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting observation. I think the polarization, and you use the phrase backed into a corner, and that's what came to mind. I think people feel like that this is such an important thing and it's backing me into a corner and I've got to do something. We all talk about, if you're dealing with a wild animal, the last thing what you want to do is corner it, because their survival instinct kicks in. And I can't help but think, even though we're not talking about survival, they're thinking about the survival of their way of life, right? That which they value. So I don't know that plays into account, like in a mass shooting. To me, a mass shooting feels like it's all about inflicting pain. Especially with a school, like what are you trying to accomplish with the school? I can see way of life being, with the shooting in New York, like where that guy was convinced, that he was protecting his as far-fetched as that is to me, I can kind of understand where somebody might be able to be convinced of that and do something like what he did. But going into a school, into a classroom, that just seems to me like wanting to inflict the most psychological pain possible.
I mean, it's terrorism. Is what it is. These are terrorists, and I mean, how much is it just to want the glory, to want that news media coverage of yourself? Like you want to be the next John Wayne Gacy or something,
Yeah.
And I don't know how you solve
that's why I'm
that.
glad that news media has at least seemed to have learned that. Don't flash the person's face all over.
Yeah.
Although it seems to be happening more with this one.
I haven't seen what he looks like.
Oh my gosh,
it's been all. Either.
I have had it all over. But I do wonder, like with the shooting in New York, with the grocery store, the 108-page manifesto, that kind of thing. But we have some of these mass shootings that they don't leave anything behind. So that tells me that they're not looking for glory. They're just trying to hurt.
Yeah. And it's hard to say how much pain they're in, mentally. Like what kind of life they've been living, how alone have they felt, and none of that's justification for doing things like this. But I think that those type of things can create, these type of people, so that they feel like maybe they're a loner, maybe they're in so much pain and they have no outlet, so they just want to inflict pain on others, even if it costs their own life to do it. And I think that's what ends up happening. And it's a shame because a lot of young people are getting into that.
Yeah. And like you said, that's not a justification, and we shouldn't try to make somebody feel sorry for somebody who, committed these atrocious acts. But at the same time, if there's something we can do to prevent those from happening, we can show little humility, even if you disagree on why they're saying that they're a loner and then people really want to be mean. If we can do something to reach out to help that, I would be more than willing to. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why, and I hope it's not just coming from a curious, nosy kind of part of me, but when we do figure out people's reasons, their motives for some of this stuff, I wish it got just as much publication as the actual acts do, because I think it would help maybe attune people to warning signs along the way.
Yeah, it's a hard argument, because that's obviously a very good argument you're making, showing some of the early signs, showing some of the stuff that looks like it can lead to that. But at the same time, I know people are always worried about copycats and maybe encouraging others to do it too. So
yeah, but don't you think motive is different than with the Columbine shootings? I mean, they went into great detail. I don't know if y'all remember, because I know that I'm much older. Yeah. But the media was all over exactly what happened. How did they get their weapons? How did they stockpile them? What did they do? How they entered, which helped schools learn how to be safer. But at the same time, you did have copycats. But I don't know, the conversation about motive would give people a copycat thing.
I know that's been in talks around the Buffalo shooters, writings, that I don't think you can really find it on any AP related website type thing, because they've decided that in the interest of not publicizing him, they decided not to publicize his manifesto or whatever. I think they even decided to not use the word manifesto because it was giving it too much credibility. They said, made it sound more like a coherent set of thoughts rather than just mad screed. Yeah.
I don't know. We're not gonna come up with a solution tonight.
No.
Well, that was our goal. I don't know what you all were doing. I planned on solving gun violence tonight.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I've talked enough. We talked enough about this. It's just so disheartening. I mean, we needed to talk about it. We've wanted to talk about it for a while. It's a shame that we had to have another mass shooting that was so devastating. But it is the world we live in, at least in America. All right, so I have a quote that I want to close with. It is from Coach Steve Kerr of the Golden State Warriors, which is my favorite basketball team currently. So here's the quote. I'm so tired of getting up here and offering condolences to the devastated families that are out there. I'm tired of the moments of silence. We are being held hostage by senators in Washington who refuse to even put up a vote, despite what the American people want. They won't vote because they want to hold on to power. It's pathetic, and I've had enough. At that point, he leaves the conference. Like he doesn't talk about basketball at all. He says that, he leaves. I thought that was pretty powerful, and that's probably the mind frame of a bunch of us at this point. So peace be to you. Have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our videos, and share with someone that you may know. Also, please follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, we have a Teespring store, so check that out as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on the Appalachian Liturgy podcast.